You know, sometimes the deepest cracks in a heart don't come loud or sudden. They come with violins playing, sunlight pouring through stained glass, and 100 smiling faces too polite to notice the tremble in your hands. Grief doesn't always wear black, my dear. Sometimes it wears ivory and pearls and walks down the aisle with a father who isn't her own. Now, I've lived long enough to know that love is messy. It's stubborn, like roses climbing up a crooked fence, blooming where you least expect. But nothing prepared me for the silence that followed that day. Not in the church. Not in the reception hall. Not in the weeks that came after. If you enjoy stories like these, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd subscribe, give it a like, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It always means something when folks like you take the time to listen. Now, let me take you back to the morning it all began. The sunlight was soft that morning, butter yellow and slow, like God himself had pressed pause just to savor the stillness. I remember the way the lace curtain caught the breeze, lifting slightly like it, too, was holding its breath. My coffee had gone cold untouched, while I sat at the kitchen table in my slip and slippers, hands folded over the invitation that had arrived 3 weeks too late. I'd read the envelope a dozen times. No stamp. No return address. Just my daughter's new last name in looping calligraphy I didn't recognize. The wedding was today, and I hadn't been invited. Or so I thought. But a dress was still hanging in my closet. I'd bought it before the silence began, before the calls stopped coming, before her voice grew strange and polite and distant. I wore it anyway. And I went. Not because I hoped to be welcomed, but because a mother only gets to see her daughter marry once. Even if she has to sit in the back pew, alone. Even if her daughter pretends not to see her. It's funny the things that trigger memory. Not the big things. Not birthdays or holidays or the anniversaries folks expect. No, what brings it back is smaller. Quieter. Like a pair of forgotten shoes under the bed. Or the smell of your grandmother's perfume floating out of an old coat. For me it was a teacup. I was dusting the hutch last Thursday afternoon. The one I'd been meaning to clear out since spring. I reached for the fine bone china, my mama's wedding set, and one cup caught my eye. Pale blush pink, rimmed in gold, with a tiny chip along the saucer's edge. The one my daughter always claimed at tea time when she was little. Mine has a bite, she used to giggle, tapping the chipped rim with her spoon like it was a secret between us. I ran my finger along that chip and felt something rise up in me. Not sorrow. Not anger. Just the ache of absence. It's been 3 years since the wedding. 3 years since I sat in that church and watched her walk down the aisle without once looking back. 3 years since she chose someone else to give her away. And 3 years since I've heard her call me mama. I've turned it over in my heart, every which way. Wondered if it was something I said, something I missed. You don't just wake up and lose a daughter. But maybe you do. Or maybe the losing happens slowly, one unanswered call at a time, until you're a stranger in your own child's story. Either way, that chipped teacup reminded me, I haven't told this story. Not to anyone. Not out loud. And maybe it's time. My daughter's name is Caroline. Named after my grandmother, who used to hum lullabies in the kitchen while stringing beans and scolding the Lord under her breath. Caroline had the same fire in her even as a little girl. All curls and questions and a spirit that didn't take to know, without a good reason. She came to me late in life, after years of praying and crying into pillows, of baby showers attended with a smile and a hollowed-out ache behind my ribs. When she arrived, it was like the world stopped to watch. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and eyes like chipped sea glass, just like her daddy's. I was 39. Her father, Louis, was 42, and kinder than I ever deserved. A jazz musician by trade, schoolteacher by calling, he wore cardigans in July and believed poetry could save the world. The day Caroline was born, he kissed my forehead and whispered, "Now we're whole." For a time we were. Caroline grew up in a home filled with music and books, and the smell of fresh-baked bread. She learned to read before kindergarten, could recite Shakespeare by 10, and would crawl into our bed during summer thunderstorms, pressing her cold toes against my legs. She was my shadow, my echo, my little mirror. Where I went, she followed, flour-dusted aprons, tomato-stained hands, pages of half-finished poems tucked under the sugar canister. She once told her Sunday school teacher she wanted to grow up and be me. And for years, I believed she still might. Louis passed when Caroline was 16. A heart attack, sudden and cruel. One moment he was humming Coltrane at the piano, the next he was gone. It broke us both, but in different ways. I clung to routine. Casseroles for neighbors, substitute teaching at the high school, knitting scarves I never wore. Caroline, though she turned quiet, stopped playing piano, stopped reading out loud, started spending more time in her room with the door locked, or disappearing with friends I never met. That's when she met Thomas. Thomas was 2 years older than Caroline, with a square jaw and eyes like overcast skies. Hard to read and harder to love, if I'm being honest. He came around that spring, tall and polite, with hands in his pockets and a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. They met at a grief group, of all places. He'd lost his mother the year before, and something in their shared silence must have clicked. Caroline started bringing him home for supper. Said he made her feel normal again. Said he didn't ask her to be okay. I tried, my dear. I really did. I made sweet tea. I asked about his job at the garage. I even offered to teach him cribbage, though the boy barely knew which end of the board to hold. But every kindness was met with a wall. Not rudeness, just distance. Like he was marking time until he could leave. At first, I chalked it up to grief. Lord knows we all wear sorrow different. But the longer he stayed, the more Caroline changed. She stopped calling me Mama, started calling me Ma. Her hair went darker. Her laughter rarer. She pulled away like the tide, slow, inevitable, and quiet. By the time she was 18, she'd moved in with him. Said it made more financial sense than paying dorm fees. Said she was still going to college, still finishing her degree. But months went by and school fell away. Work took over. She started missing Sunday dinners, then holidays. We argued, sure, but it was never about the big things. It was always little, a missed birthday call, a curt reply, a tone. And I'd apologize, even when I didn't understand what I'd done wrong. I just wanted my daughter back. But she was slipping through my fingers like dry rice. Then 2 years ago, just before Easter, a card arrived. Not a call. Not a visit. Just a card. Inside, it said she was engaged. A June wedding. Small, she wrote. Just close friends and Thomas's family. No mention of me. No return address. Just her name, signed in that new cursive I barely recognized. The day I got that card, I sat in the kitchen for nearly an hour, just staring at the words like they might rearrange themselves if I blinked long enough. I must have read it 10 times. There was no dear Mama. No love always. Just Caroline Whitford and Thomas Elridge invite you. And the rest of it blurred under tears I didn't know I'd let fall. I didn't even know she was still using our last name. I'd have thought it a cruel prank if not for the paper stock, thick and cream-colored, the kind you can't find at the grocery. And the wax seal in the corner, embossed with some kind of gold leaf rose. It was real. It was happening. And I wasn't part of it. I didn't call. I don't know why. Maybe pride. Maybe fear of hearing her say what I was already starting to believe. That I wasn't wanted. That I was some relic from a life she'd outgrown. I told myself maybe it was an oversight. Maybe she was planning something small, and didn't know how to tell me I wasn't on the list. Maybe she assumed I'd be there anyway. That's the thing about hope, my dear. It's stubborn. It survives where it shouldn't. The morning of the wedding, I woke at 5. Dressed in the periwinkle lace I'd bought the year she turned 20, thinking I'd wear it for her college graduation. Still had the tags on. I curled my hair, did my makeup like Mama taught me, and I prayed, not for reconciliation, just for clarity. When I arrived at the church, I parked down the block and walked. My heels sank in the soft earth as I stepped around puddles from last night's storm. The bell tower was already chiming. Guests were filtering in. Men in linen suits, women in pale florals, all with that same hushed, anticipatory joy weddings tend to bring. I slipped in through a side door. Found a seat near the back, behind a column, where I could see but not be seen. At least that was the plan. The sanctuary was glowing, washed in late morning light that poured through stained glass like liquid gold. It danced across the pews and painted halos on the shoulders of strangers. The air smelled of roses and eucalyptus. Heavy, deliberate, expensive. Nothing like the weddings I'd known growing up, with magnolias cut from neighbors' yards and folding chairs that creaked when you sat. A string quartet played softly near the altar, their bows moving in perfect silence like a whispered secret. I spotted Caroline's childhood friend, Lila, seated 3 rows ahead in a peach dress, her hand tucked into her husband's elbow. I hadn't seen her since the 10th grade, but she hadn't aged a day. She didn't see me. No one did. And I told myself that was good. I wasn't there to be noticed. I was just present. That's all. A witness. A mother taking what scraps of grace she could find. Then the music changed. The doors swung wide. And there she was. My baby girl. Dressed in ivory lace, hair swept back in a low chignon, veil like mist over her shoulders. She looked radiant. Older than I remembered. Like someone else's daughter. Someone else's bride. She wasn't holding her bouquet. Thomas was. He stood beside her, grinning. Too wide. Too proud. And beside him, on her other arm, was a woman I'd never seen before. Tall. Blonde. Designer dress that whispered wealth. She leaned in, kissed Caroline's cheek, and the congregation stood. I stayed seated. My hands gripped the pew in front of me, knuckles white. My breath caught. And then Caroline looked up. Her eyes swept the room, slow and careful, until they landed on mine. For a heartbeat, we locked there, her sea glass green, my storm-worn blue. And she turned away. Not a nod. Not a flicker of recognition. Just turned, like I was no more than a shadow against the back wall. The woman beside her leaned in, whispered something, and they walked the aisle together. Past me. Past years. Past everything we once were. The string quartet swelled. And my heart cracked in two. I didn't cry. Not then. I sat through the ceremony with my hands folded in my lap, one thumb tracing slow circles over the other like a rosary. I watched as the preacher, a young man with a too-white smile, spoke about love, patience, and the joining of families. I listened as Thomas vowed forever, his voice steady, sure. Caroline's voice trembled when she spoke. But she said the words. She said them all. And never once did she look back at me. The blonde woman, who I later learned was Thomas's stepmother, gave her away, kissed her cheek again when the rings were exchanged. Caroline clung to her hand like a girl lost in a crowd. And when the preacher said, "Who gives this woman?" she answered without hesitation, "We do." We. Not me. Not her mother. The reception was held in the fellowship hall, draped in gauze and fairy lights. Tables lined with name cards and catered hors d'oeuvres I couldn't pronounce. I wasn't on the list. I knew that. But something kept my feet moving, like a dream you can't quite wake from. No one stopped me. Maybe they assumed I was a vendor, or some distant aunt. I poured myself a glass of punch, stood by the back exit, and watched my daughter spin across the floor in her husband's arms. They looked happy. And that hurt most of all. She never once looked for me. Not during the toasts. Not during the cake cutting. Not when they played at last the song Louis and I danced to on our wedding day. A song she once begged me to sing as a lullaby when she was small and fevered. She didn't flinch. But I did. I stepped outside. The air hit my lungs like cold water, sharp and sudden. I leaned against the brick wall, and let the sounds of laughter and music dull behind me. My hands shook. My chest ached. And still no tears came. Until a voice broke through the dark. "Mrs. Whitford?" I turned and there stood Lila. Same peach dress, same honey brown curls she'd had since middle school. But there was a tremble in her smile. The kind of kindness that hurts when it finds you. I thought that was you," she said, stepping closer. Heels clacking softly against the stone walkway. "I wasn't sure if I should." She stopped herself, then just reached out and pulled me into a hug. "Oh, my dear." I hadn't been held like that in a long while. Not out of duty or politeness, but out of memory. Out of love. "I'm so sorry," she whispered against my shoulder. "You shouldn't be out here alone." I held on to her for a moment longer than I meant to. Then I stepped back, smoothed my skirt, and said with a steadiness I didn't feel, "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Lila nodded. She is. But she's scared too. That caught me. Scared of what? Lila hesitated. Looked down. Then carefully. Of losing you. I laughed. Not a cruel laugh, just a small, broken one that sounded more like a cough. She doesn't speak to me, Lila. She didn't invite me. She wanted to, she said quickly. But Thomas didn't think it was a good idea. He thought it would complicate things. Said you two had been distant. I stared at her. Distant? That's what she told him. Lila winced. She said after Louis passed, you started closing off. That she didn't know how to reach you. That every time she tried, it felt like you were somewhere else. Somewhere else. I turned those words over in my mind, feeling the sharp edges of them. She never said that to me. I whispered. She said she tried. I looked back toward the hall. Through the glass, I could see Caroline laughing, surrounded by people who'd never changed her diapers, never stayed up 3 nights straight rocking her through a fever, never buried her father. She made a choice, I said quietly. And so did I. Lila reached into her clutch, pulled out a folded piece of stationery. She wrote this, she said, pressing it into my hand. Weeks ago. Asked me to give it to you if you came. She didn't think you would. I stared at the envelope. Just my name on the front, in her handwriting, the old handwriting. I didn't open the letter right away. I tucked it into my purse like it might vanish if I blinked. Like I wasn't sure it was real. Lila gave my arm one last squeeze before she left me there under the porch light. Alone again. The music fading behind shut doors. I could have walked away then. I should have, maybe. But some ache in my chest kept me rooted to that spot. Like the air still held her scent. Or the bricks still remembered her first steps outside that very church. Easter Sunday, age 3, bonnet crooked and jelly beans in both hands. I finally opened the letter sitting on the bench where the smokers went. The one spot at that fancy affair untouched by the decorators. The paper was thick. Hand-cut edges. Smelled faintly of lavender. Her handwriting, my Caroline's, not that calligraphy nonsense from the invitation, curled across the page like it used to on the thank you notes I made her write after Christmas. Mama, if you're reading this, then you came. I didn't think you would. I hoped you would. I told myself you wouldn't. Thomas said you wouldn't. That I was being naive. Maybe I was. I'm sorry, Mum. I'm sorry for all the space that grew between us. I don't even know how it happened. One day you were my whole world. And the next, I couldn't breathe around you. I was drowning in your sorrow. And I didn't know how to carry my own. I wanted to ask you for help. But you were grieving so loudly, I didn't know how to whisper mine. Thomas made me feel strong. He listened. He didn't try to fix me. He just let me be. That's why I stayed. That's why I chose him. But choosing him felt like I had to unchoose you. And I've hated myself for that ever since. This wedding. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't want silence. I didn't want you in the back row. I wanted you beside me. But I was too proud. Too scared. And now, I don't know if it's too late. If you're still here. If you haven't left. Will you come find me? Please. Love. Caroline. The letter trembled in my hands as I read it again. And again. Each word slicing deeper than the last. My first instinct was to run. Not into the church, not toward her, but out. Away. Back to my car. Back to the house where her baby shoes still sat in a shoebox, wrapped in tissue. I wanted to shut the door on that ache, lock it tight like a room you don't go in anymore. But her words clung to me like the scent of her baby shampoo once did. That faint lavender sweetness, all memory and longing. She wanted me beside her. Not in the back pew. Not behind a column. Beside her. I stood slowly. Smoothed my skirt. Folded the letter back into the envelope with hands that couldn't stop shaking. Then I walked. Back through the side door. Down the corridor where the coat rack leaned and someone's boutonniere had fallen. Through the reception hall, now dimmed and quieter. Guests filtering out to catch the golden hour light. Children chasing bubbles on the lawn. I found her in the garden behind the church. Alone. Sitting on the stone bench beneath the weeping willow, veil lifted, heels in her hands like she was just another barefoot girl lost in thought. She didn't see me at first. Not until I cleared my throat, soft, uncertain. Her head snapped up. And for a moment, we both just stared. Like strangers. Like mother and daughter. Like two women trying to read a book they used to know by heart, but had long since forgotten the language. She stood slowly. Let the shoes fall. Her eyes were red. Not from tears now, but the kind that come later, after all the weeping's done and there's just ache left. Mama, she whispered. It broke me. I walked to her, and she to me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. I wrapped my arms around her, and she buried her face in my shoulder like she used to, like she was 5 again, scared of the thunder. I'm so sorry, she choked out. And I held her tighter. Because I was too. Because sorry doesn't fix everything, but it opens a door. And sometimes, my dear, that's enough. We stood there for a long while, in that slanting, amber light that comes just before dusk, when the world hushes and holds its breath. Her veil fluttered against my arm. I could feel the steady rise and fall of her breath, slower now, steadier, like she was coming back into herself. Back to me. Eventually, she pulled away, eyes glistening. You weren't supposed to be in the back, she said softly, brushing her hand over her cheek. I wanted to call. 100 times. I even picked up the phone. But then I'd hear his voice in my head saying it'd just make things worse. I tilted her chin gently, looked at the girl, know the woman she'd become. And did it. She hesitated, then whispered, yes. But only because we let it. That was the truth of it. Not blame. Not villainy. Just two broken hearts too afraid to speak through their bruises. And a man who, whether out of love or control, had built a wall where a bridge should have been. Does he know I'm here? I asked. She shook her head. No. He doesn't think you came. He made Lila promise not to tell. I nodded, heart sinking. And you? I asked. She looked away. I told him. I didn't want to fight. That it was just easier not to invite family right now. That it would be complicated. And it was, I said, not unkindly. She gave a sad little laugh. Yeah, it was. Then she reached into the bodice of her dress, carefully, delicately, and pulled out a folded photo. It was of her and Louis. The last one we ever took. He was holding her on his shoulders at the beach, her arms outstretched like wings, his face caught mid-laugh. I hadn't seen that photo in years. I kept it with me, she said. Even though Thomas said it didn't belong. I felt the shift then, a tremor under the words. Caroline. I began carefully. What did he mean by that? She looked down. Her voice was barely audible. He doesn't like me talking about Daddy. Says it keeps me stuck. That it's why I can't move on. My breath caught. And what do you think? She looked up at me, eyes clear, voice steady. I think I forgot who I was trying to move on for. That one sentence. I think I forgot who I was trying to move on for. It settled in my chest like a stone in still water. Heavy. True. Echoing. I sat down beside her on the bench, and we let the silence settle between us. Not the bitter silence we'd come to know over the years, but a quieter one. The kind that means something is healing under the surface, even if it still stings. She folded the photo gently, tucked it back into her dress like something sacred. Thomas doesn't want children, she said suddenly, as if she'd only just admitted it to herself. Says the world's too messy. Says he wants to travel, build his business, keep life simple. I blinked, turning toward her. But you always wanted kids. She nodded. I still do. The wind rustled through the willow branches, brushing her veil like fingers smoothing a worry line. Her lips trembled, then set firm. I told him that 6 months ago, she said. He said maybe one day. But I could tell, it wasn't a maybe. It was a no. And you married him anyway? I asked gently. I thought I could live with it, she whispered. I thought love would be enough. My dear, I could have wept right then. Because haven't we all believed that, at some point? That love would be enough to eclipse all else? That we could swallow our dreams for the sake of someone else's silence? I know what you're thinking, she said, with a brittle laugh. That I rushed in. That I settled. I'm not thinking anything, I said. I'm listening. Her eyes filled again, but this time with something harder than sorrow, recognition. I miss you, she said. Even when I was trying not to, I did. I reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face. That same soft curl she used to suck her thumb beside. Then let's stop trying. Let's just start again. She nodded. Quietly. Slowly. But just as we stood to return to the reception, the side door creaked open. And there stood Thomas. Hands in his pockets. Eyes locked on Caroline. Expression unreadable. Thomas didn't move. Neither did we. The air between us thickened like southern heat before a storm. Still, charged, humming with everything unspoken. Caroline's posture changed the moment she saw him. Her spine straightened, shoulders pulled back, jaw tightened. Not out of fear, but resolve. It was subtle, but I saw it. The way a woman shifts when she realizes she no longer wants to shrink. He stepped forward. Slowly. His shoes crunched against the gravel path like punctuation marks, each one louder than it ought to be. You left the dance floor, he said. Cool. Like a teacher chiding a student. I needed air, Caroline replied, voice quiet but even. His eyes flicked to me, and for the first time in years we stood face to face. He offered a polite nod. Nothing more. Mrs. Whitford. I didn't return it. She asked me to come. I said simply. He tilted his head slightly, like he was weighing the truth in that. You said you didn't want drama, he said to Caroline. That's why we kept it small. That's why. I said I didn't want drama, she interrupted, stepping between us now. Not that I didn't want my mother. His mouth tightened. Why don't we talk alone, he said. Just the two of us. Caroline didn't move. Anything you have to say to me, you can say here. That's when I saw it, the flicker. Just a moment. Barely there. Control slipping. He looked at me again. I think you've said your goodbyes, haven't you? And Lord help me, I nearly did. I nearly stepped back. Nearly gave them the space he demanded. Nearly played the role I'd been given, the distant, difficult mother. But Caroline reached for my hand. Held it tight. No, she said. She hasn't. Thomas's eyes dropped to our hands. Mine weathered with age and gardening and grief, hers still soft from youth, but firm now, unwavering. Something in his expression flickered again, this time darker. But he masked it, just as quickly. I'm your husband now, he said to her, voice low and even. What we build from here on out, it has to be ours. Not dragged down by old wounds. Caroline let go of my hand, but only to step forward, to square herself in front of him. This isn't about dragging, she said. It's about roots. Roots rot, he said. Not if you care for them. That silenced him. Her voice didn't shake, but I saw her shoulders quiver. Still she stood firm. I lost her once, she said, nodding toward me. Because I listened to fear. Mine. Yours. I'm not doing that again. Thomas glanced past her, to me, and I swear he was searching for something. An ally maybe or a soft spot. But I gave him none. Just stillness. Just witness. Do you love me? He asked Caroline suddenly. It was not a plea. Not a question. It was a challenge. I do, she said. But I'm learning that love isn't obedience. The words hung between them like smoke. Thick. Tangled. Truthful. He stepped back. For a moment, I thought he'd yell or walk away, or worse, beg. But he just nodded once, curt and cold. Do what you want then, he said. You always do. And just like that he turned. Walked back through the side door. The click of it shutting behind him sounded like a final page being turned. Caroline stood frozen. I stepped up behind her, wrapped my arms around her from behind like I did when she was small, and the thunder rolled. I don't know what comes next, she said into the wind. You don't have to, I whispered. You just have to want something more. And we stood there like that in the garden beneath the willow and the setting sun, not as mother and daughter broken, but as women bruised, yes, but beginning. Caroline didn't go back inside that night. Not to the reception. Not to the cake cutting or the sparkler send-off, or the carefully choreographed first dance they'd rehearsed in their tiny apartment living room. Instead, she and I sat in the back seat of my old Buick, barefoot and breathless, her veil folded in her lap like a linen napkin someone forgot to iron. She stared out the window most of the ride, her chin resting on her fist, mascara shadows just barely clinging beneath her eyes. I kept my hands at 10 and 2, knuckles pale, heart quieter than it had been in months. Finally, as we crossed the Ashley River Bridge, she spoke. I don't want to go home. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. I just flicked my blinker and turned toward my house instead. The house where she learned to walk, learned to sing, learned to cry into pillows the way I used to, quiet and proud. The porch light was already on, as it always is when someone I love is out past dusk. She smiled when she saw it. That little smile broke me more than any of the day's pain. Not because it was sad, but because it was familiar. Inside Muffin, my ancient tabby let out a single, disapproving meow before curling back into her sunken spot on the sofa. Caroline scooped her up, buried her face in that warm fur, and whispered, I missed you, old girl. I watched from the kitchen, putting on the kettle. Still Earl Grey? I asked. She nodded. And for a moment, just a moment, I was back 10 years with a girl in pigtails asking for an extra sugar cube, and her daddy playing Coltrane in the den. When we sat down at the table, she unfolded herself slowly, like she'd been cramped in a too small box and didn't know she could stretch. Do you think I ruined everything? She asked. I shook my head. I think you rescued yourself. She let out a shaky breath, half laugh, half sigh, and looked down at her tea. Rescued. That's a generous word. It's the right one, I said gently. You didn't just walk out of a wedding, Caroline. You walked back into yourself. She stared at me, then wiped at the corner of her eye. You really think I could start over? I reached across the table and took her hand. My dear, life doesn't care much for clean slates, but it always offers new pages. We sat like that in the dim kitchen light, the scent of Earl Grey steeping between us, her wedding dress pooling around her like a ghost she wasn't sure she wanted to keep wearing. I could see the war inside her, guilt, relief, anger, sadness, all clawing to be heard. I was so scared I'd become you, she whispered suddenly. I didn't flinch. I mean, after Daddy died. You just disappeared. You were there, but you weren't. I thought if I let grief in, I'd vanish too. I nodded slowly. I did disappear. For a time. You were right to be afraid. She blinked. I loved him so deep, when he went. I didn't know who I was without the shape of him beside me. I continued. And I'm sorry for what that cost you. Silence again. But not the hard kind. The kind that lets wounds breathe. I think I married Thomas because he wasn't like Daddy, she said. He was solid. Predictable. Quiet. But he didn't love me loud. She looked at me then. Daddy loved you loud, didn't he? I smiled. Oh honey. That man set the world on fire every time he looked at me. Even when we argued. Even when the sink was leaking and the baby was crying and life felt like too much. He still saw me. And Thomas never did. She didn't say it. She didn't have to. That night, Caroline changed out of her gown and into one of my old nightshirts. We drank the last of the tea, folded up the veil, and she curled up on the couch beside Muffin, eyes finally soft with sleep. Before she drifted off, she whispered, Do you think he'll come after me? I brushed her hair from her forehead. If he does, let him come. But this time, let him find you whole. The morning came gentle. Caroline woke before me, barefoot in my kitchen, trying to remember how to use the old percolator I refused to throw out. The smell of coffee crept down the hallway like forgiveness in steam. I found her standing by the window, hair tousled, nightshirt too big, and the light just beginning to brush her face in that quiet way August sun does when it's still deciding how hot it wants to be. She turned when she heard me. Good morning, she said, voice rough with sleep. Morning, I said, tying my robe. You look like you belong. She smiled, but it faltered just slightly. I don't know where I do belong anymore. I poured myself a cup and joined her by the sink. Sometimes the place that feels like home isn't a place at all. It's a person. She nodded, eyes glossy. Maybe that's why I came back. We didn't say Thomas's name. Not yet. The silence around it still needed time to breathe. Instead, we sat on the porch, two women in slippers, watching the garden stir to life. The roses were in bloom, big, fragrant, messy things that didn't care what anyone thought of them. Caroline reached out and touched the petal of a pale blush bloom, the same color as that chipped teacup she once claimed as her own. I think I knew, she said. Even before the wedding. I think I was waiting for something to stop me. And when nothing did, I stopped myself, she whispered. Too late maybe, but I did. I looked at her, my grown daughter, full of questions and heart and sorrow and courage. She looked back, and I saw it then. Not just the girl she'd been, but the woman she was becoming. Stronger. Clearer. Still afraid but moving anyway. We heard the crunch of tires then. A car pulled into the drive. And out stepped Thomas. Caroline froze. I felt her breath hitch beside me, like a cord tightening somewhere deep in her chest. She didn't move. Didn't run, didn't stand. Just stared as Thomas stepped out of the sleek black sedan he always drove like it was part of his identity. He looked rested. Pressed. Like someone who'd already rewritten the story for himself. He didn't bring flowers. Didn't even glance toward me. Just walked slowly toward the porch steps, hands in his pockets like they lived there. Caroline, he said. She stood, but didn't speak. I figured you'd be here, he added, like it was nothing. Like it was obvious. She swallowed. Why are you here? He looked at her, really looked, and for a moment I thought I saw something human crack through. Not regret, not apology exactly, but something close. I thought maybe we could talk, he said. Caroline glanced at me. I didn't nod. I didn't push. I just waited. The way you do when you know someone has to decide something for themselves. I don't think I can do that, she said, her voice so soft it nearly disappeared into the morning breeze. Not today. Thomas blinked, shifted on his feet. I'm your husband, he said, like it meant more than it did. She shook her head slowly. You were. He opened his mouth, but she kept going. I thought you knew me. I thought maybe you could love the parts I'd hidden. The grief, the memory, the pieces that belonged to my daddy and my mama and the life I had before you. But you didn't want those. You wanted something easier. Quieter. Less me. He stood there silent. And then without a word he turned, got back in his car and drove away. No storm. No shouting. Just gone. When his taillights disappeared around the bend, Caroline sat back down beside me. Her hands were shaking, but her voice wasn't. I think that was my first real decision, she said. One I didn't make out of fear. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. You made it with love, I said. And that's what makes it last. We sat like that until the coffee went cold and the cicadas started their summer song. It's been 9 months since that morning. Caroline moved back in for a while, just until she found her footing, she said. She took over the guest room, started substitute teaching at the elementary school up the road, and spent long afternoons in the garden with me, relearning the names of things she'd once known by heart. Queen Anne's lace, lemon balm, snapdragons that curled like tiny mouths. She filed for an annulment quietly. No court drama. No drawn-out fights. Just a signature on a page and the long, slow exhale of a life unclaimed. Sometimes we still sit on the porch at dusk, 2 cups of tea between us, muffin curled at her feet. We don't talk much about the wedding anymore. Not because we've forgotten, but because it's no longer the sharpest thing in the room. It's become what it was always meant to be, a turning. Last week she laughed again. One of those real, full-bellied laughs that starts in the chest and tumbles out before you can catch it. She was reading something, some old journal of mine she found tucked between books, and she looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said, "You're so much braver than I ever realized." But I'm not, my dear. I just loved her enough to show up. Even when I wasn't wanted. Even when it hurt. Even when she broke my heart in front of 100 strangers. Because that's what mothers do. We show up. And sometimes, if grace allows, they come back. If this story opened something quiet in your heart, my dear, I'd love to know what lingered. Leave me a note below, share it with someone who might be walking that same road, and subscribe if you'd like to sit for another story sometime soon. Some tales find us when we need them most. And remember, even on the happiest day of someone's life, there can still be sorrow waiting in the pews. But sorrow doesn't mean the story's over. Sometimes it means the real story's just begun.